Honestly, Arya, I don't know why you put yourself through this. Renting is just pathetic. It's like throwing your money into a furnace every month. The hook was delivered by my sister Serafina, with a shudder of disgust that made her expensive diamond earrings swing. We were standing in the cramped kitchen of my small, anonymous apartment, surrounded by boxes. A sight that, to Serafina, confirmed my inherent failure. It was the eve of my mandatory attendance at our parents' annual summer party, and Serafina, 39, had come to deliver the final pre-game lecture. My name is Arya Vance. I am 34 years old, and for the last 8 years, I had maintained the image of a financially struggling artist, moving frequently between small, inconveniently located rental units. To my family, I was the cautionary tale. The sister who chose creative freedom, my photography business, over financial stability, a corporate job, and who, consequently, lived hand to mouth. Serafina was the physical embodiment of the family's values. She owned her sprawling, custom-built home in the city's most affluent suburb, driven by her husband, Julian, a successful commercial real estate broker. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Vance, were both corporate executives whose greatest pride was the visible generational wealth symbolized by owned properties and large mortgages. Renting, in their view, was the ultimate sin of irresponsibility. The background conflict was the decade of condescension surrounding housing. They saw my small apartment as proof of financial scarcity. I endured endless lectures on 401ks, equity, and the foolishness of not building assets. What they didn't know was that every dollar I saved by avoiding a mortgage, I invested immediately into acquiring distressed residential properties across the country, managing them remotely through complex anonymous LLCs. My struggle was a calculated financial strategy. You have a degree, Arya, Serafina continued, leaning against my cheap countertop. You could be building equity. Why do you keep moving? And this neighborhood, it smells like old pizza and disappointment. You're single, you have no attachments, yet you choose this financial treadmill. I like the flexibility, I replied, a practiced neutral defense. It keeps my overhead low. Flexibility? No. It shows a fundamental lack of commitment, Serafina countered, her voice hardening. You're living paycheck to paycheck, clinging to a dream. Look at Julian and me. We own 5 properties now. 5. That's legacy, Arya. That's what happens when you prioritize ownership over what? Mood? She gestured toward a stack of documents on my tiny desk. Are those notices? Are they raising the rent again? Just some business correspondence, I said, quickly covering them with a magazine. The documents were, in fact, closing papers for my latest acquisition, a portfolio of 3 high-value suburban townhouses, managed under the primary shell company, Ether Properties. Serafina ignored my deflection. You know, Julian is looking for new tenants for one of his rental units. It's a nice 2-bedroom near us. We could give you a family discount. It would be an improvement over this box. The offer, a thinly veiled attempt to assert financial dominance and control my geographic location, was the final insult. I'm fine where I am, Serafina. No, you're not, she sighed, exasperated. You're stuck. You need to grow up and get stable. Ownership is the only marker of true worth. The current event trigger was set for the following evening, the Vance's annual summer party, the perfect stage for Serafina's public performance of stable wealth. I spent the next day finishing my hidden work. My focus was on the properties I had just acquired. One, in particular, was an immaculate, modern townhouse near the city center, the kind of aspirational property Julian often flaunted to his clients. This townhouse was part of the 3-property portfolio I had purchased yesterday. I had been watching Serafina and Julian for months. Their frantic acquisition of properties was masking their own financial strain, specifically an aggressive short-term loan they had taken out to fund a risky development venture that was now failing. They were dangerously over-leveraged, and the only way out was rapid, discreet liquidity. I knew Julian was planning to unload a property quickly. What he didn't know was that I had already bought the portfolio that included the only asset he could sell quickly and discreetly. The next evening, the humiliation scene began immediately at the Vance home. The air was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and inherited superiority. Serafina, radiant in a new gown, led me by the arm toward my father. Dad, look. Arya made it! Didn't even take an Uber. I made her park down the street. We need to save her money where we can, right? She announced, drawing a polite, pitying chuckle from the surrounding guests. Arthur, my father, placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Alara, good to see you. Now listen, Julian has just finished finalizing the sale of one of his rental properties. You should talk to him. He cleared a massive profit. That's how you do things. Clear assets when the market is right. A massive profit, Arthur? I asked, my voice calm, maintaining my role as the naive, struggling artist. Absolutely. That's real estate, Alara. That's what Julian specializes in. Ownership leads to liquidity. Not that you would understand living rent by rent. Julian approached the victor. Hey, area. Yeah, just offloaded the Bayview townhouse portfolio. 3 quick sales. Saved my neck on the new development. I'm thinking of taking the proceeds and finally moving to the Hamptons. We'll be mortgage-free by October. He looked at me, his smile wide and condescending. How's the job search, by the way? Still taking pictures of people's dogs? The photography business is fine, Julian, I said, meeting his eyes. But I wanted to ask you about the Bayview townhouse portfolio. I heard that was a complicated closing. It was a nightmare, he scoffed. Had to sell quickly and quietly. Ended up dumping the whole package to some anonymous holding company out of state. Ether something. But they paid cash immediately, no questions asked. Cleared the loan in hours, saved my reputation. Best thing that could have happened. He laughed, triumphant. The proof of worth was established. Julian had confessed his financial desperation and confirmed the sale to my company. The moment of revelation was now perfectly set. I pulled a crisp white envelope from my small clutch bag, an envelope identical to the one I had covered on my desk yesterday. I handed it to Julian. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the cocktail chatter. I think you need to review the correspondence you signed yesterday. Julian took the envelope, annoyed by the interruption to his victory lap. He frowned as he pulled out the document. It was a formal communication from Ether Properties. He quickly scanned the contents, reading the sender's name, the legal letterhead, and the stated purpose of the letter. His face, moments ago flushed with champagne and triumph, turned instantly to a sickly pale gray. What is this? He whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. That, I explained, addressing the silent circle of Vances and their powerful friends, is a formal notification from Ether Properties, the company that purchased your portfolio yesterday. It details the upcoming transfer of management responsibilities and the new payment schedule for all existing contracts. Serafina rushed forward, snatching the paper. She read the letterhead, then scanned the content. Management transfer? What contracts? Julian, you sold the whole thing. I did, Julian stammered, looking helplessly at me. But you left something out, Julian, I noted, my voice dangerously calm. You sold the portfolio that included the Bayview townhouse, the one you live in. The silence that descended on the Vance family was absolute. Arthur choked on his scotch. Eleanor placed a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between Julian and me. That's a lie, Serafina shrieked, pushing the papers back into Julian's chest. We own this house. We have a mortgage. You had a mortgage, I corrected her, delivering the turning of tables. Julian used the house as collateral for the failing development loan. The transfer documents he signed yesterday confirmed that the house, as an over-leveraged asset, was included in the portfolio sale to the immediate liquidator, Ether Properties. I stepped closer to Julian. I am the principal and sole founder of Ether Properties, Julian. I bought your house yesterday. The sheer terror in Julian's eyes was devastating. He realized the full scale of his exposure. No, you can't be. You rent a tiny apartment. You're the one who struggles. I rent a tiny apartment to keep my overhead minimal while I aggressively acquire income-producing assets, I explained. While you were focused on visible ownership, I was building invisible sovereignty. The flexibility you mocked was the financial maneuver that allowed me to pay Julian cash immediately, the cash he needed to save the rest of his failing investment. He didn't sell to a corporation. He sold to his pathetic renting sister. Arthur, my father, finally found his voice. A thick, choked sound of pure paternal defeat. Ava, you own Julian's house? You are his landlord? Yes, Arthur, I confirmed. And my first act as his landlord is to deliver the attached document. I pointed to the original envelope I gave Julian. He slowly pulled out the second paper, a clean, formal document in bold print. That is a formal notice of rent adjustment and lease renewal, Julian, I stated. Your previous mortgage payment was $4,800 a month. As of January 1st, your new rent under Ether Properties will be $6,500 a month, reflecting current market rate for the property you now lease from me. Serafina let out a high, hysterical sob. You're raising our rent? You're punishing us! I'm adjusting the asset for optimal yield, I stated, using their own cold corporate language against them. And I have one final condition. I want your current, highly visible tenants, Serafina, to be models of responsibility. I will not tolerate late payments, noise complaints, or any damage to the property. Any violation of the lease terms will be met with immediate legal eviction proceedings. You mocked my security, Serafina. Now, your security rests entirely in my hands. Julian stared at the document, the weight of the realization crushing him. The man who prided himself on owning 5 properties was now a highly leveraged tenant in a property owned by the sister he ridiculed. The immediate aftermath, the landlord's law, the party ended abruptly. The Vances' friends, sensing the catastrophic financial and familial implosion, made swift, awkward exits. Arthur and Eleanor were left standing in their expensive foyer, staring at me with a mixture of terror, anger, and dawning respect. The following day, the real, painful work began. Julian and Serafina attempted to fight back, their initial strategy being denial and threat. Julian called me immediately.
Ava, this is illegal!
You used insider information. This is vengeance. I'm calling my lawyer! We'll contest the sale. You signed the sales contract, Julian, I stated, my voice coming from the office of my lead counsel, Marcus. The contract clearly states that you sold a portfolio of distressed assets for immediate cash liquidity. You were desperate and you signed it. The only thing illegal here is the fraudulent representation of your own financial stability to your wife and family. I suggest you focus on making the January 1st payment. Serafina's calls were purely emotional. How could you do this to your own family? You knew we were struggling. You knew we were counting on that equity to save us. You're destroying our lives. You called me pathetic for renting, Serafina. I reminded her. You mocked my lifestyle and implied I was financially worthless. I simply removed your primary symbol of worth and converted it into an income stream for myself. You defined the terms of this war. I simply executed the final transaction. The most profound realization came to Arthur and Eleanor. They were forced to publicly confront the fact that the daughter they ignored and pitied was the only member of the family with genuine financial sovereignty, while the son they championed was a bankrupt liability. Arthur called me late that evening, his voice heavy with defeat. Ava, I need to understand. Why the humiliation? Why not just help Julian quietly? Why the ownership? Because you didn't value help, Dad, I explained. You only value control and status. If I had given Julian a quiet loan, you would have mocked me for my generosity and called it pity. By taking ownership, I forced you all to recognize that the small, silent renter had the capital and the intelligence to acquire your greatest symbol of wealth. The humiliation was the only way to correct the decade of condescension. He had no answer. He simply hung up, the line going dead with the sound of his broken pride. The landlord's discipline. The next 3 years were marked by a quiet, continuous application of the landlord's law. Julian and Serafina lived in constant, agonizing fear of eviction. Julian, stripped of his corporate identity, found low-level work at a smaller real estate firm, trying desperately to rebuild his life. Serafina was forced to take a part-time job to cover the elevated rent. Every single month on the 1st, I received an electronic transfer, a tribute paid by the over-leveraged sister to the pathetic renter. The discipline I applied was relentless. I never spoke to them personally, only through Kurt. Formal emails from Ether Properties Management. A late payment, notice of violation. Rent received on the 4th. A late fee of $300 has been applied as per Clause 4.b of the lease agreement. A minor repair request. Work order number 492. Request for repair is noted. Inspection scheduled for next week. Maintenance personnel will require access between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Failure to provide access will result in a $50 fine as per Clause 7.d. I forced them to interact with me on my terms, using the cold, objective language of property law and finance, the very language they had used to dismiss my creative career. The constant pressure stripped away Serafina's social life entirely. She couldn't host parties or invite her friends over, knowing they were living in fear of being discovered by their ruthless, unseen landlord. The social pillar of her life crumbled under the weight of her financial instability. One day, Serafina called me from a blocked number. Her voice was raw with desperation.
Ava, please, I'm begging you.
Lower the rent, just for 3 months. Julian lost a commission and we can't make the payment. I cannot adjust the terms of a legally binding commercial lease for personal reasons, Serafina, I replied, maintaining the distant, professional voice of Ether Properties. I suggest you consult with a financial advisor. You are so cold. You have no heart. You're making us suffer, she cried. You called me pathetic for renting, Serafina, I stated, the final crucial reminder. You taught me that ownership and control are the only things that matter. I simply learned your lesson better than you did. Pay the rent, or face the consequences. The final surrender. 4 years after the takeover, Julian called me, his voice not angry or desperate, but simply exhausted. Ava, he said, we can't do this anymore. We're breaking. We want to move. We'll pay the lease termination fee, but we can't stay in this house knowing it's yours. I accept your termination request, I said. Ether Properties will send the final documents. Julian paused. I need to tell you something, Arya. I was wrong. You weren't pathetic. You were brilliant. You saw the game better than I did. I wasted 10 years chasing status symbols while you quietly built an empire. I'm sorry for everything I said. The apology was genuine, born of years of forced humility. It was the final, unanswerable victory. Apology accepted, Julian, I said, allowing a trace of my personal voice to show. I wish you well. I closed the lease, liquidated the property at a massive profit, and reinvested the capital into my next venture. The moral closure was absolute. My family had defined me by my perceived failure to own a home. I had responded by becoming their landlord, turning their greatest symbol of status into my most valuable source of income. The mockery ceased, replaced by a deep generational respect, built on the unassailable foundation of my quiet, strategic success. I had won the game by refusing to play by their rules, proving that the greatest power lies not in being seen, but in owning the entire board.